And so in a certain sense, it's an odd fit to talk about humanitarianism as a neoliberal technology. Of course it is. And I could tell you volumes about how we see this kind of detail work on the ground in places like Sudan, Haiti, across the globe. About 20 years ago, just before the second Intifada launched off, in a speech to the Knesset, Ariel Sharon, in a speech where he for the first time mentioned something that we later come to know as disengagement, that the kind of liberal media at the time was talking about as Palestinian independence, he framed the proposal to a Knesset that was not necessarily expecting to hear Ariel Sharon, of all people, say something about disengagement, with the reminder of the millions of Palestinians who lived under occupation, who relied for their everyday livelihood and upkeep on humanitarian agencies at the international level, and said, do you really want to deal with them? They have rights not to be bombed. But if the market is the thing that is supposed to take care of their fundamental rights, what often gets lost is that economic violence, which includes the destruction, disabling, or other form of intervention into their infrastructures of life support. Now, obviously, right now we're seeing bombing of these infrastructures from the air. But we need to not forget that during all the decades of occupation that we have behind us, infrastructure has been a central target of the occupational state. A central target that has systematically made life unlivable in Gaza, and has done so while maintaining the fiction that we are dealing with a humanitarian form of management. Why? Because we're not attacking bodies. Because what we essentially have in these forms of humanitarianism as an international imperial form is another form of gift exchange, and it is the mutual reciprocity.
I want to start, I think, with the very obvious. And the very obvious is that neoliberalism is a political ideology masquerading as an economic theory. It has been presented for the last 40 plus years as a brute fact of nature, something beyond politics and economic science. It is none of these things. Neoliberalism is a technology of wealth concentration. It functions to make the rich richer by making the poor poorer. And it does that, importantly, both within countries and between countries. We have had almost exactly 40 years of neoliberal intervention by the IMF, by the World Bank, by the World Trade Organization, and supervised by the system of international investment arbitration. In that period of time, a grand total of 0 states have developed, or progressed, or improved under IMF tutelage. Even wars are a neoliberal exercise, as Manuel said, in essentially money laundering. So the US says, we're going to give $14 billion to Israel. But what the US actually does is spend $14 billion on private weapons manufacturers to produce stuff to send to Israel. So I've said this before and I'll end on it again. Gaza is a small but dramatic genocide unfolding within a much wider, much less dramatic genocide.
International law simply requires that if you're resorting to the use of force legitimately, and that is potentially a question mark here as well, based on the interpretation of the International Court of Justice, but if you are using force legally, that use of force must be only resorted to, that self-defense needs to be necessary. So here, in that case, one might legitimately ask the question whether or not it is still necessary for Israel to continue to use force. Has the threat been eliminated or not? And a very plausible argument can be made that it has been eliminated, perhaps from day one. One can actually make the argument that the attack could not have been replicated in the first place, that there's no threat, or there's no real and significant and clear threat of the replication of that attack. But again, the fluidity of international law allows for the claim that no, as a matter of fact, as long as Hamas is there, then there is a continued necessity to eliminate Hamas. The discretion of the state, because it's at the end of the day a very state-centric system, the discretion of the state when it comes to when and how to use force, and finally how it accrues or how it accepts responsibilities as an occupying power.
I was saying that the Israeli perspective and its implementation of the Oslo agreements of 1993 was to encourage the settlement of the West Bank, to leave it to the settlers to settle this West Bank, and to keep the peace and the order that Israel wants in the West Bank. Very much a technique of neoliberalism, reducing the role of the state. But this is also a very Israeli version of neoliberalism, because you do not have one version of neoliberalism, like you do not have one version of socialism or of communism. And the version in the West Bank is settlers supported and abetted by the state. So in fact, the state does not withdraw completely in neoliberalism, neither in Israel nor in any other country. In fact, the state intervenes differently in the governance. Ceasefire are defined in international law. But pause has an obscene dimension to it. Because I think, I don't know, but probably most of those here are interested in social science. And maybe certainly some of exact sciences are here. But in social science and in humanities, we only have words. And words are important. Meanings are important.